Dan, shall we go to live? Or is Carl?
Yeah, live, yeah.
Right. Okay, well, welcome to the meeting of the Corporate Policy and Finance Committee, and this is the meeting on Wednesday, the 6th of January. First of all, I would just like to ask if I don't think there are any apologies for the meeting. I think we're all here. Second, members, can I ask if anyone wants to make a declaration of interest at this meeting? No? Councillor Butterworth. I think you're muted.
All right. Yeah, a declaration of interest, the usual one, which may or may not be strictly relevant, but as a St Albans District Councillor and Chairman of the Rotherhithe Park Management Committee, to the extent that any of the budget items or any other item indeed concerns that subject matter, then I have an interest to declare.
Councillor Farmer?
Yes, I suppose I should make a similar declaration.
Yeah. Carol, do we need to make declarations if we're councillors for other councils?
So, Chair, I mean, I was going to ask for councillors to confirm this. So essentially, I think what Councillor Butterworth and Councillor Farmer are saying is that you're declaring a non-pecuniary interest, I believe, rather than a pecuniary one. And that's non-pecuniary as a member of the council that the assets relate to.
Yes.
Rather than a pecuniary one, which would require you to leave the meeting for that item.
Yep. No, absolutely, Carl.
Well, Carl, if you could also add myself and Councillor Paul to that, because we're also members of St Albans and District Council. So any others? No? Carl, what about things like allotments? Do we have to, given that the budget is tonight, do we have to make a declaration of interest on that?
Well, it's up to individual members to decide, Chair. I guess my advice would be, if you were a member of one of the boards of one of the allotment societies, then you may wish to, or if your partner is a member of a board, you may wish to. But if you were just a plot holder, then I don't believe you've got any beneficial interest or requirement to declare any type of interest. But it's up to individual councillors.
Okay, anybody on the managing committee, board, or a partner on it? No, I don't think there is. Okay, so that's the declaration of interest. Chairman's report, I have nothing to report. Dan, Carla, are there any officer urgent items that you would like to bring up for this meeting? No?
No, Chair, no. Thanks.
Okay, public questions in accordance with Standing Order 22. Have there been any public questions?
None received, Chair.
Okay. We move on to agenda item 5, which you'll find on pages 1 to 4. This is the minutes of the Corporate Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 11th November 2020 and which have been circulated. Does anyone have any comments on those minutes? No? Okay. I will then sign them as a true record of the meeting and pass them on to the Town Council. Right. Agenda item 6. We have two meetings where the minutes are being referred to this committee. The meeting of the Accounts and Risk Subcommittee on the 22nd of October and the meeting of the Accounts and Risk Subcommittee held on the 10th of December. There is one recommendation, and that's minute 20, to recommend the risk management strategy and risk register for approval by the Corporate Policy and Finance Committee, and if so approved, for forwarding to Council for approval. Does anyone have any comments on the risk management strategy? Carl?
Chair, thank you. Just to confirm that there is a separate item on that matter later on the agenda, and at that point, there is any comments or questions to be made.
Okay. Well, can I ask that we recommend that it's forwarded, and if this committee then agrees that changes or things be added to it is added to it before it goes to the council. Roger.
Chair, just to echo what the town clerk was saying, is I think as a matter of procedure, quite properly, we approve the minutes because those were the minutes. And then when we get to 7.3, we talk about the substance, and that's where the recommendation arises strictly.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, let's approve the minutes then. So we recommend, well, no, actually, because we're recommending that it's approved, Roger. We're recommending the risk management strategy is approved. If you look at the recommendation.
Well, you're receiving the minutes that the committee recommended something, but actually we're getting in a tangle. If the right thing to do is to merge 6 and 7.3 and discuss the risk management strategy and risk register now, then that's the other approach. Yeah,
we could do that, or you could just say that it's going to go forward with any additions. Do you want to bring forward the risk management strategy to now? Can I see a show of hands if you agree? Okay, so anybody not? Okay, let's bring 7.3 forward. Any comments on, that's on pages 27 to 80. Any comments on the risk management strategy? John.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say that the risk committee spent a long time working through what has been a very, very complex exercise. And the risk register is much improved on last year. And I'd just like to record thanks to the officers for the significant amount of work that must have been involved in producing what I now think is a first-class document.
Thank you, John. Having read it, I would concur. Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, and thank you to John. I concur with that as well, exactly what I was would have said. And in particular, I point out the extra document which was circulated today, which gives more detail of the scrutiny that went into the risk register. But even before that, a lot of work had gone into it by officers, which is to be commended. Although there's some further things which you suggested be looked at next year, that's not surprising, given that the document's undergone a major overhaul by officers and then the committees. So yes, I'd certainly commend it for putting forward, and I or Dan, I'm sure, would answer any questions if people have them on the documents.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else got any comments on it? No? Okay, then can I recommend that it's put forward for approval? Those in favour? That's unanimous, thank you. Okay, moving on from item 7 on to officers' reports. Item 7.1, the forward planner and resolution tracker, which you'll find on pages 13 to 16. We are being asked to, and just give me a moment. Right, we're being asked to note and approve any comments or amendments subject to any comments and amendments that you may make, the forward planner, and note the resolution tracker which is attached to Appendix B. I'll take the forward planner first. Does anybody have any comments or amendments on the forward tracker? No? Okay. The resolution tracker? No? So can I then say that we note and approve the forward planner? Can I see a show of hands, please, to agree that? Right, that's unanimous. And note the resolution tracker. Can I see a show of hands, please, for that? Okay, thank you. That's agenda item 7.1. We move on to agenda item 7.2, and I'd just like to raise before we start looking at that, just comment a couple of comments that have been made to me. If in future years at this stage, if we could have the budgetary control for the year before the budget, that might be a better way, because then people will have just talked about the budgetary control figures which gives them a really good base to then start talking about the budget for the following year. I think we'll take it as it shows at the moment, because you've all had a chance to look at the budgetary control figures anyway. But and we'll start with the budget, but we may want to reverse them the next time we do this, and just take that as a note. Roger.
Chair, sorry to interfere, but you're having said that it's more logical to do it the other way around. Why don't we do it the other way around?
Do you want to do it like that? It's up to you. I'm easy. You'll notice I'm very relaxed tonight. Does anybody have any objections? We're monstering this agenda. So anybody get any objections to that? No? Okay, budgetary control. Go to page 81. Okay, we've been asked to note the report. Okay. Does anybody have any comments or queries on the report? John.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to ask, because this is the effectively the position as at the end of November, and obviously the profiled budget shows a position at the end of the financial year of March. The numbers as presented suggest that we're on track to actually continue to be broadly in line with the profiled budget, which is obviously very, very good. Is there any reason the officers might be aware of why that outturn might not be as profiled? For example, in relation to commercial income, though I suspect most of the events have now occurred anyway.
Daniel?
One of the main things that we've got is that with the new restrictions in place, we've had to shut Park Hall. So the income stream that we had through there, we were on target as at the November report, but I need to do some more work to forecast how we're going to be at the end of the year based on the closure of that, because that's obviously a good commercial income stream for us.
Okay. Bill? You're muted, Bill.
Teams, it's down the bottom. Yeah, on page 84, that long table there, in the bottom section, I notice Hartman Cares comes in as a black and a red figure. Having said that, the question is, did we get any money from government or via St Albans for offsetting any of our costs? Carl might know that one.
Carl? I think you did, but Carl can explain.
Dan, do you want to pick that one up?
Dan.
Yep, sure. So out of that 29,000, so I just need to refresh my memory on that. There was funds from Harpenden, from Herts County Council, from Councillor Heritage and Councillor Williams, and then there was a further grant of 10,000, I believe. Sorry, so many screens open.
Chair, I can pick up just while Dan's finding that. So the 29,000 in there is a mix of locality budgets. There is £10,000 that we managed to draw down from the district council, and the remaining 9.2 is actually from a donations campaign that councils will remember that we did last year, and the funding from that was raised through the account and donation mechanisms at the Harpenden Trust and came over to the town council to distribute. In terms of wider grants relating to kind of COVID, as you can see in there, that we also managed to secure one of the government's discretionary grants at the kind of the second round of asking. So the first round of asking, organisations like ourselves couldn't access it, but when it was opened up more widely, we were able to bring in that discretionary grant, which has allowed us to probably be in more of a positive picture overall than we would have expected to be. And just to add one thing, if I can, just to Councillor Drake's question. So Dan's quite right in setting out about the Park Hall, but actually we're very mindful that our wider commercial income is very volatile still. So the Lydekker car park being a really good example. So our profiling would have expected the high streets to be more populated at the moment, and therefore the car parks reaching higher levels. So it's very much of an unknown. The problem we have with our car parks is that the information that we receive from the district council is normally quite lagged. So we don't get a live picture. We tend to get that 2-3 months late. So we won't have a good idea as to what that's looking like probably till March, April time.
Okay, any other questions? No? Can I ask then that we vote to note the report? I see a show of hands, please. Okay, that's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, that's item 7.4. If we go back to item 7.2, the budget. Okay, first of all, I'd like to say two things. One, I'd like to thank officers. This is unprecedented times. Officers are having to put together a budget when there's a lot of uncertainty about all sorts of things, not least commercial income, but also even items like how much of the council tax will district be able to collect, uncertainty around what we actually do in the town centre given lockdown. I mean, there's just a huge number of uncertainties. This has been exacerbated by the fact that we have an ambitious agenda for next year, and officers are trying to give a forward forecast of how much of that we'll realistically be able to achieve. I mean, it looks, for example, like we'll be in lockdown till at least March, but we don't know what will happen after that. It may continue. It may stop and we go back to normal in the spring or the summer, or it may not. Nobody can really say. And officers have done an outstanding job in putting together this budget in the face of all that uncertainty. The second point I'd like to make is that a budget is a process. Yeah. One of the things that we have done is we've done the bottom-up part of the process. So we have put together all the aspirations, ambitions, and the decisions that have been made by the different groups, and we've amalgamated them and showed first for the two different committees that run the council, and then into this budget. But in fact, although we have agreed a lot of the underlying principles that we're going to use in this budget, this is really the first time we've seen the budget. And what tends to happen after this point is that having done that bottom-up process of amalgamating everybody's kind of the agreements that have been made, and the using the criteria that have been agreed and the assumptions that have been agreed, we've now seen what that means in financial terms. The next stage is either we agree it because we think, yeah, fine, we agree. We've clearly agreed in part in the council and everything that's gone into it, and this committee has agreed all the assumptions that have gone into it. But sometimes when you see the financial impact of what has been agreed by different groups, you do another iteration. Yeah, and that's I mean, they call it bottom up, top down budgeting. And so we're now at the stage where we look at it and we say, okay, now we understand the financial implication. Do we agree, or do we go through another iteration? So that's really the decision which faces us tonight. What I'd like to do is to now ask councillors for their comments on this budget and comments and queries, and then we'll have a discussion about what we do next. And I'll start with John.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, I agree with that introduction. With a former finance director's eye, I think there are challenges here that we need to think about. I think the officers have done a first-class job in putting together a first cut here. But I think we would be remiss as councillors if we didn't at least challenge the basis of the quite detailed assumptions that have been provided, because I think the townspeople would expect us to have done that. And there are two particular points which I'd like to raise, which are clearly risks. The first one is in relation to the commercial income, which has been left essentially at the same level as the pre-COVID levels, compared to the previous year's budget, except for the £20,000 reduction at Lydekker Park car park. I think that will be a considerable challenge to maintain, given particularly where we are today and what you've just said about likely continued lockdown over the period. And I'd like to have some comfort that in the event that commercial income doesn't materialise, that the council has contingency plans to adjust to that, which indeed we have broadly managed to do this year. And that because we can't afford to eat significantly into the general reserve, which is only at about 4 to 5 months level at the moment. And therefore, we need to ensure that we've got some kind of contingency planning around that loss in that commercial income. I do recognise that for every pound of commercial income is not a pound loss on the bottom line because there's costs associated, but that is a worry. The second point is the significant increase in the precept at 20% Now, I know in terms of value, this is very small amount per household, but there's still the principle of a very large increase being made at a time at which many families are facing economic stringency. And therefore, I think we need to examine what are the reasons for this increase in the precept. There's obviously the Rothamsted part, which we know about, we've discussed, but there's obviously costs over and above the SADC release of special expenses, which have contributed here. Secondly, there was last year, and I admit at this point didn't dawn on me until I did the reconciliation of figures this year, that of last year's precept, it was subsidised to the tune of about £40,000 as a release from earmarked reserves, which came off the precept requirement, which of course, as I understand, is being used to cover costs which are recurring year on year. I think because it involves staff, we probably don't want to discuss that specifically, but those costs, so that capital release from reserve is covering ongoing revenue costs, which we now have to raise through the precept this year. And then even without that, there is still a significant increase in the precept, though obviously I'd recognise the point relating to staff costs are contractual and not set by this council. So I just think that we need to ensure that we are happy that there are good, robust reasons why those increases are there, and that they are the right thing for the council at this stage when there is economic restrictions throughout the community. Thank you.
Roger.
Thank you, Chair. Now, I say John has made some excellent points there, which I'm sure as a group we'll come back to. He's made the points far better than I could have done. I'd just like to amplify one particular point, if I may, which is concerning the park, and I'm very much personally in favour of the town acquiring the park. We really must do that. We've decided we will. So it's various conditions being satisfied, and that would be the right thing to do. But there are two lots of extra costs. Some of the council tax will come to us instead of St Albans, partially to cover costs, but not totally. And there's a figure in here which is hopefully a representation of the balancing item. But also, as well as being a major asset, it has the potential, sadly, to be a major liability. So I'm just querying whether we've really bottomed out what the liabilities could be. I mean, we've seen the flooding in the autumn, which may or may not be an insured liability, if it's a liability at all. and were that to be repeated, could it cost the town council, or what would it cost us to try to make changes in the contours, perhaps, or the drainage to alleviate that problem? And equally as the trees, which may or may not have been looked after over recent years, but I'm sure the town council would take its responsibilities seriously and would do whatever's necessary, which could cost money. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Nigel?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, Roger, it's just taken some of the wind out of my sails. I was also concerned just to find out how robust the budget actually was in relation to if things got worse. For example, you know, normally there's fat in budgets. I think I wouldn't mind the officers being honest with us and just give us some idea whether there might be some ability to be flexible, either in setting the preset rate or some fat to allow us to absorb any other unknown eventualities that might hit us the next few months. In particular, when it comes to the park, I know back in September, we gave authority for the town clerk and the town mayor to process matters forward on the acquiring the park, which I'm all in favour of. But I would like to have some know about the liabilities we're taking on in relation to the expenditure built into the budget, particularly as the drainage issue has been mentioned, the tree issues. Is there a tree audit? Where are we now in the football situation? Has that changed because of COVID? And also, for example, making good the park. For example, if you look at the mess to the drive-in and the gateway and all the rest, I'd like to think that was all taken care of by either the contractor or the district council before Harpenden Town Council ever became the legal owner, etc.
Yeah. I can see that Carl is taking a note of these comments. Does anybody else have any specific comments they'd like to raise? Rosemary, then Bert. Rosemary, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm unmuted now. I just wanted to say that in terms of the precept increase in percentage terms of 20%, I mean, people may think that if you translate that into financial terms, it's may appear to some people to not to be a huge amount, but there are people in this town who've lost their jobs. There are people who will be furloughed. There are businesses that are struggling. There are pensioners coping with increasing costs on very fixed or limited incomes. And I think it's very difficult to explain to people who will see it in percentage terms when they are struggling, that I think need to be very sure you can make a very, very good case out, and that perhaps should revisit and have a little look and see if there is some scope that this can be managed.
Bert.
Probably a naive question, actually, but is there anything in our protected expenditure which could be capitalised from any money remaining from our lump sum we received? I suspect things like the new pavilion is already coming out of that 2.65 million, whatever it was, but is there any sort of money left from that 2.65, anything in our budget to reduce that 20%, which could be capitalised?
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile having a scan of this revenue budget, because, for example, there's an item called projects, and you typically capitalise project you don't split it into revenue and capital. You typically capitalise the whole of a project. Yeah, and so I think you're right there. I think there's an opportunity to maybe recast this budget in another way so that it doesn't impact the precepts so dramatically. Any other comments? Melanie.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, in terms of the increase in council tax, I think that's totally beyond my visibility. I would be interested to know what happens at district level as well. I mean, it was only when I became a councillor that I realised there was more to the total bill than you know, you look at the total what you're paying. If we are paying more because we now actually own Rothamsted and we're finally going to make something of it, but I'm paying less at district level, to me, that's neither here nor there. I do really agree with the point made, like this is not the time for increases in preset. But I would like to see it as an overall thing too, insofar as we can. I don't have that insight. I just wanted to make a point.
I'll just say this is just and you're absolutely right, Melanie. When you get an asset from another council, they should hand over the money to run it at the same time. So they will be raising tax to run that asset. When they give you the asset, they should hand you over the money to run it. And so one of the things we need to look at is if it's costing more to run it than district's paying, or if it's costing more annually to run it, then they're handing over. What is that gap and why is that arisen? And that might be something we go back into the negotiation to talk to them about. So, and I think that reflects back to what you said, Nigel, on Rothamsted Park. Yeah, okay. So any other comments? Carl?
Thanks, Chair. I think I need to come back on some of the points just to give some reviews, some advice, and also just some clarity on things. Having listened to all the different views in there, and I'll try to group them together rather than sort of deal with each councillor's comments one by one. So, and forgive me if I do end up jumping about a little bit. So, I think it's fair to say, given the times that we're in, this budget is still full of lots of risk. We don't know whether our commercial income targets will stack up. We reduced the income by £20,000. One of the reasons that we haven't gone further, one is because we're optimistic that hopefully we can, you know, at least in the second part of this year, make a good fist of getting back to where we were before. But secondly, we're very mindful that the wider pressures that we've got, if we start reducing our targets on our commercial income, we're actually increasing our budget pressures, and we're having an even bigger gap. So we're very mindful to get that kind of balance right. And I think jumping across to Councillor Turnbull's point on that, there isn't any fact as such. So the way in which that we would have to react to in-year lower commercial income is one of two ways, really. One is to utilise reserves as and when we're made aware of challenges. One of the beauties of the council is that it's got a very strong budgetary control set up, in that it considers, you know, budgets at every CPF meeting, and it also considers it for accounts subcommittee. So there's plenty of opportunity to foresee where something is looking like it's not going to be at the target we expect. So one of the ways to utilise reserves, and the other way is to, as similar to who we've done in this financial year, is implement a revised emergency budget. So whilst all of our general budget lines are profiled as to the work that we're going to carry out, we deliberately don't front load all that work. So some of that work, I don't know, like pathway improvements down at Southdown Ponds, will be towards the end of the next financial year. So the two reasons why we do that, and the main reason being that it gives us some flexibility if things change in year. So there isn't really any facts other than to swallow up any changes to the commercial income. So, you know, it is a risk, and it is a big risk, but how far do you go between, you know, lowering your expectations, knowing that you're actually going to increase your gap even more? So that's the first point on that. In terms of kind of wider liabilities in terms of Rothamsted Park, there'll be a full update at council at the end of this month as to where we're at, which will be an update on all of the due diligence that we're carrying out based on all of the information that we're receiving from district. And it's fair to say we haven't received it all yet, and so there are bits missing. There are two key elements that kind of are agreed with them, that will hopefully give some reassurance. The first is that once we take over the park, if that's completed, we will have a licence back to the district for the area of the spoil relocation. And that licence will be very clear that the only point at which time we will stop that licence with the district is at a point in time when the town council are content that that's been made good to a level that we would expect. So it won't be the district council telling us that they think it's okay now and it's over to you, it will be worded the other way around. So that offers some reassurance. The second bit of reassurance around flooding is that we'll be very clear in the transfer documentation that we won't have any accrued liabilities, so that we know that there have been liabilities previously in relating to neighbouring households. However, taking on an asset like that, in the same way that we have some liabilities around flooding coming off the common, we would have some future liabilities. And so as part of any management plan, as council have discussed previously, we would expect the management plan to set out kind of short and medium term flood management solutions that would need to be funded through the council, or indeed through the county council, who we understand have got some money as part of a pilot project. So again, there is still risk associated to that. And in many ways, when you take on a park and an asset like Rothamsted, you can carry out due diligence, you can see the latest tree surveys, you can carry out your own health and safety surveys. But in many ways, it's not until you get hold of something and you run it for 12 months till you truly see what's going on. And without being too kind of critical of the district position on it, it has suffered from a lack of investment. And so you would expect that taking it on, we would need to invest in it in more ways than just the play areas that we've got set out. And then just a couple of other comments. So in terms of the special expense in Rothamsted Park, I just want to clarify that no money comes over to us unless this council increases its precept for that. So what happens, the special expense value, which is £3.20 equivalent on the Band D, will come off the district. If this council doesn't raise that by the equivalent amount, that money's gone. So there is no automatic shift over. Now, the figures that we've got on the special expense is set out in the report. The costs to run Rothamsted Park is in addition to that. And the council has always been aware of that right from the start, and that's been very clear in all the reports. That's why you've got the £30,000 in the budget, which is there to top up the difference. And again, flagging a risk to you, and one of the reasons why this is genuinely a lean budget. So we are putting in here that there's £78,000 to run Rothamsted Park. On top of that, there's a small amount of income that comes in through the football club and other sources. So we think we've got about £85,000 of budgeted expenditure available to us. Just to highlight, the grounds maintenance contract for John O'Connor when it comes over will be £77,000. So we have deliberately again made sure that the figures that are in his budget are on the lower side because we recognise the wider constraints. So the idea behind that is that we would, thinking about that liability thing, we would run the asset for 6-12 months to really understand what's going on. There could be a scenario where actually we could make savings on some of that grounds maintenance contract. And I won't go into too much of that given that we're in public, but there's opportunities there. But it's likely that if there are any repairs that are needed in year, then we would again have to go and look at the use of reserves, particularly earmarked reserves, where we've got them for commons and greens. And the last thing I would just say in relation to reserves, now there is of course the opportunity to use capital receipts for some work, but you are only having to catch up at some point down the line because the work never stops. You are always making improvements in our management plans. So, if you cover off a £20,000 of the management plan this year, at some point in the future, that reserve or that spare funding is going to run out and you're going to have a bigger budget gap and a bigger issue. So I think I've flagged that sort of concern before, but useful just to do so again. So hopefully that's some useful thoughts based on discussion so far.
I think that's really helpful, Carl. Nigel? You're muted, Nigel.
Thank you, Chair. One point, Carol. Surely, if in fact there's been some of the trees are dangerous, that's a liability at the point of transfer, and therefore there should be a cash consideration being put aside by the district council to cover the additional works which we will have to do in year one just to make everything safe.
Yeah, Chelsea, you're quite right. So sorry, I knew I would forget something. So the other bit in answering that bit of the question, Councillor Turnbull and Chair, is that prior to any handover taking place, the districts and ourselves have carried out health and safety surveys, and they will be carrying out the high risk work to the trees prior to the transfer. So all of the identified work from the health and safety survey will have been complete prior to us taking ownership. And that again is one of the key conditions and one of the principles that council have insisted upon. And that largely, the majority of that work has started to take place prior to Christmas, and there's more to be done.
Okay. Nigel?
So, sorry, Chair, to be pedantic on this. Do I assume, Carol, that therefore we will be party to any safety review or health and safety review of all the trees before that's signed off and given to them to sort out? It won't be signed off by them and implemented by them, if you know what I mean.
No, certainly not, Chair and Councillor Turnbull. The part of the due diligence that we're carrying out at the moment, in terms of all the various documents, every lease, every licence, every legal agreement associated to the park, and indeed the liabilities around flooding and trees, we are making sure that we will be satisfied ourselves that things are good.
Okay.
And we certainly, at no point, you know, for those of you that have worked for me for a while, I won't take someone else's word, certainly not district word at the moment, that things are in a good place tree-wise, because I'm not necessarily confident from an officer to officer point of view, and apologies if they're listening, that they're getting delivered to the standard that they should be. So my duty will be to report to council to say I am comfortable, as are my officer colleagues, that the work that is being said to be carried out is carried out, and indeed done to a standard that we would expect.
Okay. Right. Are there any other comments? Nigel?
Yes, Chair. May I just compliment Carl on his very clear and erudite view on what he'll be doing. I compliment him for his diligence. Thank you.
Okay. So we have, if I just summarise, we have a bit of an issue. At a very high level, there is a concern that we're increasing the precept by 20%. To be honest, a time of austerity. And this, although a small number in itself, if everyone did that, it would have a huge impact and completely destabilise the lives of many people in this community. And therefore, I'm not saying we shouldn't do it. I'm saying that we need to look at it in an awful lot of detail and look if there are any other options we could go down to reduce the impact on local people. So that's perhaps the first thing. The second thing is there's this concern about the uncertainty in the environment, and should we be stress testing the budget a bit more by looking at some options, particularly around whether the stream of commercial revenue comes in or not, and if it doesn't, what the impact is likely to be. So I think from that and from the discussion on Northampton Park, it may be worthwhile not making a decision about this budget tonight, but literally ask officers for a bit more work and a bit more information. Yeah. Now, what do the members of the committee think about that? Do you think we should do that? We should just ask for more work. You know, how could the impact on the precept be reduced, and how would officers deliver that? Yeah, so that it doesn't rise as much. What will happen if we don't make the commercial impact thing? How can we manage our costs or manage the revenue capital profile? So interested in your views. Roger, your hand was up first.
Thank you, Chair. We've obviously started a discussion here, and some valid points have been made, and I'd like to echo what Nigel said, in that the town clerk's response was masterful, and yet it does seem on top of all the the detail, which is extremely reassuring. However, from a governance point of view, I think we do need further discussion and perhaps some further options rather than just, as it were, option A. Is there an option B or even a C to choose from, which might give slightly different outcomes? We should test that. Even if we come back to where we are now, we would then have done our job in governance terms. And I feel if we simply approved it now, despite apparently it's been looked at very well, and no reason to doubt that. But I think we should go on discussing and looking at options personally.
I mean, even if not an options, a pick and mix approach. Where are the opportunities for the budget to change, and which ones? Because you have to remember something, colleagues. Everything in this budget is things. This is the officer just putting the figures around what our committees have said they wanted. But now we know what the impact of that is. Our committee, we may, as a group of councillors, change our mind and present to council. You may not want, given the impact on the precept, given the uncertainty around COVID, you may want to delay this project and not incur the costs in the 21-22 time frame. You may just want to slide it into the next year. There's infinite opportunities to move a budget around a bit, to see how just when the cost will impact. So even moving 6 months can a series of projects 6 months can fundamentally change a budget, and we've not really had a look at what the opportunities are to do that. John, you wanted to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Just only briefly, I don't want to repeat the points that have been made. I just think it is important when you've got such a significant increase in relative terms that we are seen to make sure we have robust reasons for any increase. But also we have a problem with as I said, the commercial income, in that that could actually exacerbate the position rather than improve it. I was encouraged very much by what the town clerk said about his ability to deal with the challenges of potential shortfalls in commercial income, which is one of the comforts I was particularly looking for. But maybe I would just like a little bit more solidity about what our contingency plans would be. Should this be the budget, but then there be further risks to it.
Yeah, thank you, John. Any other comments, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should take from what we said at the start that we must, and a lot of people have agreed this, we must be very robust in our understanding why we're putting the precept up by 12 or 15 pounds, depending how you look at it. But by the same token, I think all of the local residents deserve to know in our considerations what would be gone if we didn't do that. So I would like to see, for example, okay, if we didn't increase the precept by more than 2%, what would we not do next year? And I think when you can say that to people, people will say, well, surely you're going to cut the grass on the common, surely you're going to sort out that path. So I'd make that point. I'd also make a point that if we're going to properly stress test commercial income, you're probably talking about saying at least half of it is lost. 150,000 or more is a proper stress test, given we know we could be in lockdown till the summer. And again, we need to say, well, what would we do? And I think it's also fine to say, if we would fund that all from reserves, that's what our reserves are there for, then to say at the end of the year, that would leave us with half the reserves that we previously had. And then we can make those statements. And then a final point is a bit broader, but I'd be happy to discuss it with residents, is nearly all this money that we are planning to spend, whether it be on the contracts or on basically staff salaries, is being acquired and spent locally. And nationally, we have thrown hundreds of billions of pounds at that very problem, the decline in the circular flow of income. So it doesn't mean to say we willy-nilly spend what we like, but we need to be aware that if we do make significant reductions in a plan to expend in, that is less spending happening in and around Harpenden. And I think that's something that people have become very conscious of in the last 6 or 9 months nationally. So again, I think we could defend that, but I think it should be laid out in quite stark terms.
No, I completely agree with you, Paul, and I think that the circular economics case is can actually be quite a strong one. You may take, I mean, what you're doing is you're taking it from one hand, you know, you're putting it in one hand and taking it from the other, really. So any other comments on this before I make a recommendation? Anybody? Melanie, then Carl.
Yeah, further on to that point, I think I would be very cautious to have any sort of, that it looks like there's almost a foregone conclusion that we need to defer the transfer of the park. I think if anything, the park has been hugely popular during lockdown and will continue to be so. Playgrounds are being open. That playground's rubbish. Parents have nowhere for their children to really let off steam properly. So I just wanted to be cautious that it's coming out of that, because it's a huge asset. And as Carl said, and I agree, I think it has suffered from lack of spend. So I would think, let's be creative and open-minded and see what we can do with any reserves, as one of the other councillors made in the comments. What have we still got left? How can we do it? So I think I totally agree. I just wanted to be cautious that we don't say, oh, well, the park will just have to wait, because I think that's exactly what people need right now from us.
Yeah, Melanie, I completely agree. But one of the things is that the if we take on the park, we're in this budget, we're talking about the revenue implications of taking on the park, whereas the playground is a fixed asset, and therefore it's not a revenue implication. So that's not here. Yeah, that's coming out of capital budgets. So however, one of the things that I think life teaches us is that if you put something else in place, you have to maintain it. And sometimes the running the maintenance initiative actually hits your revenue budget because it costs more. In IT, for example, the rule of thumb is if you put new IT in, plan on something like spending 30% a year to maintain it. Yeah. So parks and playgrounds are very similar. There is a figure which it costs to maintain. So I think good point. Right. Anybody else? I saw a hand waving. I'm not sure where it was. Oh, it was Cam. Then Bert.
Thank you, Chair. So just reflecting and hearing. So I've certainly heard what the committee is minded to do, and what I would just need to make absolutely clear is that in any recommendation, you'll need to be clear to me as to what the parameters are you're asking us to carry out further work on. And that is in the context that the budget you've got in front of you is to deliver the council's business plan that the council has already agreed. And as I've mentioned, it's lean, it has lots of risks associated to it. So I would need to be very clear as to what further work that this committee is recommended is carrying out in order for us to shape that. That's the first thing. The second point is actually from a governance point of view, and this is where I'll share a concern on this, in that if this committee is minded to ask that work comes back to this committee, then I think we are straying away from good practice on governance. And the reason I say that is because the budget that's been put together so far, whilst obviously officers have worked on it, it isn't an officer budget, it's committee budgets. So there is a danger that if this committee now is going to look to make recommendations to change the desires of Community Services Committee, for example, so this committee making a recommendation to spend less in Batford Springs, for example, from a governance point of view, I think that's straying into poor practice, because the very councillors that are responsible for the day-to-day management that on a governance point of view won't be having any impact on that recommendation. So my advice in that sense would be, if there's further work that needs to be carried out, if this budget as is being rejected and there's further work required, then that further work and that parameters should be taken back straight to council for a full discussion at council of all councillors. The alternative is we're looking at poor governance, but we're also looking at duplication of conversations as well.
Okay, thank you, Carol. I mean, I think that's an excellent point. However, what I would say is that this committee will be looking at a number of options. As I said, you know, a portfolio of options that could be put forward. Clearly, that would then go forward to council. They would see a budget that was put forward by this committee, but they would also see maybe things which costed items which we maybe have taken out of that budget going to council, and council will then have the opportunity to vote as a whole on whether that should go back in. I think trying to get the full council to do that detailed work in such a time frame is not, will not work. And I wouldn't like to see that nothing happens before the end of January, and then suddenly something which, again, we find that needs more work pops up at the end of January. I think having an interim step where these things are put forward and discussed by councillors next week would be very valuable. And there's nothing actually new in this. If you actually look at how government works, and Paul can give me his view if he likes, the spending departments put all their ideas together. It goes to the Treasury, who put an overarching view, and then there is a debate. And I think that's where we are now. We've now got the overarching view. We're a bit concerned about it, and what we'd like is a few more options. And if necessary, we'll present those options to full council. And I would suggest further that we meet early next week. And I've looked at my diary. I'm free on Tuesday. I don't know about other people. And those, I mean, Carol and Daniel are pretty much on top of this budget. So it'll be fairly straightforward for them to start going through and take it apart a bit and put things in. Rosemary, is there another meeting on Tuesday? Oh, you're muted.
Try again. I was just going to point out that it couldn't be next Tuesday evening because there's planning.
Okay, so it's going to have to be Wednesday. And if it's Wednesday, I mean, what we have to do is be very cognizant of the fact that we need at least 3 days to call an extraordinary meeting. So it can't be before Tuesday. And we'll need a certain amount of days to have the agenda prepared for council. And so there is a deadline on officers to prepare the agenda for the 25th. I suspect, given the 3 working day rule, I suspect the agenda for the 25th could probably go out on the 23 to the 20th, the 19th or the 20th. Yeah, but officers will need time after the next meeting to consolidate what we agree at the next meeting. Carol, have you got a heads up on that?
Yeah, Chair, just to reiterate, if there's expected options to come back next week, then the resolution you make tonight needs to be very clear as to what options you want us to provide as a starting point. The second point to make, that in order for me to issue a summons to a meeting, the meeting would have to be on Wednesday. It couldn't be any other time.
Why is that?
Sorry?
Why must it be on Wednesday?
Well, because Wednesday is the earliest point in which it could happen within our governance structure, because we've got a planning meeting on Tuesday. And also,
can we make it Thursday?
So making it Thursday would be some logistic problems for officers. I know that. The other link to that is the draft report for council has to be ready for next Friday. The lead-in period that we have in terms of sign-off with the mayor and the deputy is next Friday.
Well, I'm sure the mayor and deputy will escalate their sign-off later to help us get out another look at the budget. Wednesday doesn't work for me because I have the great joy of looking at the budget for district on Wednesday. So there would be a definite, and as chair of the committee, it would be good. Now, what we could do is have it on Wednesday at an earlier time. We don't need to have the time, the 7:30 time. I'm sure we could maybe have it at 5, and we don't need every member of the committee. What we need is a quorum. So Carol?
Yeah, I just need to clarify the timing. So the dispatch for council has to go out on the 19th. So in order for the chair and the deputy of council to consider it, that's why it would go out on a Friday for them to consider the pack over the weekend, of which is a very detailed pack. So that's the governance timescales that we're working with. So if you did our meeting next week, it would have to be resolved at that meeting exactly what you were recommending to council. And as I say, I would need this evening very clear what the options are you want to be reported back next week.
Okay, that's great. We'll take the timing. If we say, does anybody have who has a problem making it earlier next Wednesday? Melanie? Paul? Who has a problem with it earlier on Tuesday? Why do you, when
Can I just make a comment which makes this a bit broader? I think, to be honest, we've gone down a bit of a rat hole here. I didn't really hear in any of the conversation the last hour anybody saying there was a fundamental problem with the budget that has been put forward to us tonight. There's plenty of comments which are very valid about the risk and the uncertainty, but I haven't heard anyone look at anything there and say that there is any genuine fact. There's no appetite to take really big steps that would have to be taken. Like, for example, as Councillor Prigger mentioned, walking away from our commitment to take on Rothamsted Park. I haven't heard that. So I don't see why we don't, and certainly I don't have a problem tonight approving, well, to put forward to the town council meeting this budget. But what I would suggest we could do at the town council meeting, or having approved it, ask for information that then says if certain things occur, for example, loss of half the income, which we talked about because of a very extended lockdown, what we might consider doing, so that the full council is aware that as we walk forward, what we'd have to do. I don't have all I was asking for was the ability to have the information to say to the residents, well, we put forward this £15 extra charge, and if we hadn't put forward this extra charge, we would have to make these particular cuts, which we as a committee have decided not to do.
Okay, right. First of all, is this committee happy? Could I see a show of hands of those members of the committee who are happy to put forward this budget to full council? So that's 2. So that means that 6 aren't happy to put it forward to full council. Can I see a show of hands for the members of the committee who would like to have another meeting to discuss the options, which we'll go through in a minute, Carol? More options on what the budget should be.
But to be clear, I don't think that meeting has to happen in the next week.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to happen in the next week, otherwise we don't have a budget to put to council.
In that case, I don't agree with having a meeting next week.
Can I make another point? I think we have to be a bit realistic here. As a parent, as I'm homeschooling 4 children, as well as working from home. My days until 7 o'clock, every hour from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. is accounted for one way or the other. I'm not sure how this position is of the people that work for the council. If they have similar problems where they're juggling both homeschooling and working, and they have to get the meeting papers out, we have to be realistic in what they can actually provide to us without, surviving, because we're in for a marathon. And, I don't think this is the time to put undue pressure on workers for the council if we can manage it in another way at all.
Okay,
I appreciate there are things we need to do in the budget, and I totally agree with all the points. I just fear that without having asked them what is actually realistic that we can provide, we might put undue pressure on them, and that results only in bad things.
I understand, Melanie, and I have a lot of sympathy for the view that we should encourage a balanced work life for our officers, particularly in the very difficult circumstances of COVID and lockdown. However, I think this is a fairly unique circumstance. I know, for example, Carl's children are not old enough to be homeschooled, so he's not in the same situation as you. And I completely sympathise with any councillor who would not be able to make a meeting next week. But we actually only need we need to be quorate on this committee. And I mean, I think it's important the chair is there, but the other than that, we just need to be quorate. And so if individuals, because of home circumstances, cannot make the committee, I think we absolutely have to be sympathetic to that. And they may, I mean, for example, at times I've not been able to make a committee, and what I've done is I've sent my written comments to the chair, and the chair has then brought my viewpoint to the committee. So that is one way in which you can make a contribution without actually having to be there on the night. But I think you're right. I think we have to be sympathetic and be flexible in these ways. So I think the vote has been that we'll have a further meeting next week. If we have it on the Wednesday, could I ask Carl that we have it earlier on the Wednesday, and we'll talk to councillors about a time that's appropriate for, or even later on the Wednesday, and get a time that's suitable for as many councillors as possible. Carl?
Yeah, Chair, so in order to meet on Wednesday, the summons would need to go out in the morning, in which case you'd need to resolve this evening the date and the time of the meeting.
Okay, if we had it on Wednesday at 5 o'clock, who can make it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, most of us can make it Wednesday, 5 o'clock. There's only one person can't make it. Roger, you wanted to say something?
Chair, may I ask a procedural question in that I fully respect Carl as the expert on procedures, but I would point out that what in effect we're doing is holding, making an adjournment and holding an adjourned meeting, and perhaps the formalities for that are somewhat less rigorous than if the next week's meeting were to be a self-standing meeting in its own right.
No, Chair, our standing orders don't allow for adjournment, so it will be a new meeting next week, in which case, because it's not programmed, it will be an extraordinary meeting. This meeting opens and closes in the same way that every meeting has to. So it would be an extraordinary meeting and subject to the rules of the standing orders.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Right, in terms of what we expect officers to do, I think we have to take, officers have taken that they are implementing the business plan as laid down by the committees. I think one of the things they're going to have to do is to look at those projects in the committees and their impact on revenue, and perhaps list them and say if those projects were either delayed or, well, pretty much it would be a delay until the following year or later on in that year, what would the impact on revenue be? The second thing they can do is to look at the opportunities for capitalising particularly project-based items, where you may have staff who are completely project-based as a revenue item. Look at the opportunity, and I'm sure John can help you with this. Look at the opportunities for capitalising that. Although I do understand that public sector accounting rules are slightly different. The third area is the opportunity for just not doing things, or perhaps doing a bronze service rather than a gold service or a silver service for 1 year only, given the time of austerity we're moving into and the problems that we're having with COVID. And for example, for the first part, you might not be doing anything anyway for the first part of the period. So you may be, you know, there may be an opportunity to have people on furlough. You don't know if there'll be a furlough scheme there. And this is, I know, I know Carol and Daniel, this has been part of your issue because of the sheer uncertainty of what's going to happen over the year. So if you start looking at that, and I'm sure that if you'd like to talk about it this week, we could have an informal meeting and just maybe run through some of the items. Yeah, and I would, Cal, yeah.
Yeah, so just thank you for that. That's much clearer. So Dan and I have got and wider team have got an idea of what we should be bringing back. Just to clarify that there's no opportunities for the town council around furlough because all our posts are publicly funded. So we won't be able to bring anything forward around that. And again, just to manage expectations, the sorts of work that you're requesting here, being realistic, we would be able to get report to you on Tuesday lunchtime.
Okay. And I think we would accept that. We wouldn't expect reports to come out way in advance because we understand that there is work to be done here. Okay. Does anybody have any other comments or queries on this? So can I have a show of hand that is the approach we're going to take? Okay. Okay, I think that's the majority. Thank you. And I think Melanie also. Was that a comment, Melanie, or were you agreeing? Okay, so that's the budget. Any other items before we move off the budget? Okay, so if we go to agenda item 7.3.
That one's now resolved, Chair.
That's now resolved. Agenda item 7.4, budget to control. That's now resolved. We're doing well. The next one is the review of internal control and internal audit. And we have been asked to approve the attached review of internal control and internal audit arrangements and approve the level of the Town Council's fidelity guarantee insurance from 2 million to 5 million. I will ask, does anybody have any comments or queries on this report? Okay, right. 2 people, and we started with John last time, so we'll start with Roger this time.
Yeah, forgive me, I've not read this agenda as I perhaps ought to have done, but it's probably all right, but curious to what the cost of the increase in the level of insurance will be. What's the premium increase per annum? Thank you, Chair.
Daniel?
I'm still waiting on a response from our insurance brokers on that. They've sent me some further documentation to fill in that after getting back from the Christmas break. So my intention is to get that off to them this week. So I should have an answer on that next week or so, hopefully, depending on how quickly they get back to me.
Okay. John?
Thank you. Roger's taken my first question. The second question is I wasn't quite sure how you arrived at 5 million, Dan, because it seemed to me that the most we had in the bank, even when with the precept receipt, was going to be about 3.5 to 4.
I think with the amount that we've got in the earmark reserve and the capital reserve and the general reserve, plus the precept, it felt it was getting closer to the 5 than it was the 4, so I just wanted to be prudent and increase it to the 5.
Yeah. I just wanted to understand how you got to the number. That's thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Any other queries or comments? No. Right. I'll ask you then. Are you minded to approve the attached review of internal control and internal audit arrangements? Can I see a show of hands, please? Paul, is that a no?
No, that's all right. Yes. It was a no to the last item.
And I'm asking you to approve the level of the Town Council's fidelity guarantee insurance from 2 million to 5 million. Can I see a show of hands, please? Right. Roger, are you saying you're not approving? Is that against?
Well, it just seems odd to approve it when we don't know the premium increase. I mean, it may be the answer is the insurance is peanuts anyway, and even a 20% increase in peanuts is still peanuts, in which case fine, but I prefer to have some sort of indication as to what we are approving, please.
Anyone else comment on that, or are you minded to approve? I'm seeing heads nodding. Carl?
Yeah, Chair, so perhaps to offer some reassurance, what we could do, given that you're meeting next week and hopeful that Dan will have the figures by then, and the fact that any change will have to go into the budget, so you could perhaps approve the level of, improving in principle the level of the Town Council's fertility to go up, subject to understanding the insurance cost implications. And then you can...
I'm fine with that, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do that then. So we add subject to understanding the cost implications. Are we agreed? Yeah. Melanie, are we agreed? Yeah. Okay. Was that a yes, Paul? I don't know if I saw. Yeah. Great. Thanks. So that's unanimous. Okay, if we move to agenda item 7.6. Which is on page 93. This is the annual governance and accountability return. It's been this has been completed by the external auditors, and there were no issues arising from the audit. I'd like to congratulate Dan on having an audit with no issues. Having had audits with issues, it's lovely when there aren't any, because the amount of work involved if there are is horrendous. So well done, Dan. And we have just been asked to recommend to Council that the audited annual governance and accountability return for 2019-20 is approved. Does anyone have any comments or queries before we, Roger?
Sorry, being pedantic. Page 95. Perhaps we could point out to PKF for next year that we're having a town council, not having a parish council. Just to show.
Well spotted. I didn't spot that. Okay, could you take that as a note, Daniel? I wouldn't put that in as a recommendation, but we'll take it as a note.
Yeah,
so,
that's fine. I can raise that with them.
Yeah. Is the recommendation approved? Can I see a show of hands? Yeah, Rosemary, I think you were up. Yeah, okay, that's been approved. Thank you all. Right, the next one is the Treasury Management and Investment Strategy. And this is the framework for any short or long-term borrowing or investments during the forthcoming financial year. We've been asked to approve the Treasury Management and Investment Strategy. Sadly, nobody's making much money from investments at the moment. So it's all kind of a bit of a moot point. You're more worried about the risks to the money than how much money you're making from it, I think, at the moment. So does anybody have any comments on the investment strategy? I think it's pretty much the same as we saw last year, actually. Yeah, no comments, any queries? No. Colleagues, are you minded to go to the recommendation? Yeah, okay. I'm asking you to approve the Treasury Management Investment Strategy for 2021-22, and that's unanimous. If you want to take that, thank you very much. And moving on, item 7.8, which I think is our last one, the Citizens Advice Outreach Service. This is something that comes up every 3 years. We give them 5,000 a year, and we've been asked to approve that for the next 3 years. Now, I have been over the years fairly I've taken the governance role in this very, very seriously. And I've challenged a lot of what the Citizens Advice people have brought forward, and we've had robust discussions. But what I would like to say on this is that Citizens Advice that role has become even more important during COVID, that many people have struggled, and if there is an economic consequence to COVID, many individuals will struggle, and the role of citizens' advice in helping with debt management is likely to become even more important in this area. And I'd kind of like everybody to bear that in mind when we consider this recommendation. So the first thing I'd ask is, does anybody have any questions or queries about the report? No? Happy to move to the recommendation? Yeah. Okay, we'll go to, you've been asked to 2.1.1, note the progress made by Castad and Harpenden since the start of the current agreement. Can I see a show of hands, please? So we agree 2.1.1 unanimously. 2.1.2, approve a contribution of 5,000 per year for the next 3 years. Can I see a show of hands, please? Thank you. That's excellent. And item 2.1.3, approve the draft SLA and Appendix A for signing by the town clerk. Can I see a show of hands, please, on that one? Again, that's unanimous. So anybody against? No, no. Okay, that's excellent. So all of those recommendations have been agreed. I don't think there's a 7.9. So I think that's it for our agenda tonight. I'd like to thank you all. 8:51. We've done it in an hour and a half, which is good for a budget meeting. And I'll see you all again next Wednesday at 5 o'clock, those of you who can make it. So thank you for your attendance tonight. And I didn't say at the beginning, I should have. Happy New Year to everybody. Right.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Happy New
Right.
Year.
Bye all.
Bye.